with us knows who you are, what you do. So I will begin with asking probationary overseer Eli Azar to introduce yourself and anything else that you want to add.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Great to see a lot of you on the line tonight, all the youth, all my friends, and also some colleagues that I've worked with in the past. Really great to be part of the discussion. My name is Eli Azar, and I am a former youth leader of this great youth group. So I'm amongst family and friends again. I also work as a school social worker in Durham District School Board, and I do work in private practice right now, meeting with a lot of youth and also different individuals, groups, and families. And I am a pastor in training. So that is why I have such a long first name, but I'm really glad to be amongst you all tonight.
And thank you so much for that introduction. Next, we'll ask Mrs. Dora Poku to just share her name and a little bit about herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dora from PIWC district. About me, part of our choir, part of also the youth leadership. I was just the past youth secretary for my district, and I work with young people. Currently, I work as a development social service worker, looking to go in to get my bachelor's and master's in social work soon and practice as a mental health counselor.
That's great. All right. And next, we will ask Dr. Joseph Smith to please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Nice to be here again. So I am an academic, TDSB trained educator and prospective administrator. I run a nonprofit, so I'm the ED of my own nonprofit, Generation Chosen. And I work for a few other orgs, FFBC, which is the Foundation for Black Communities, which is a philanthropic institution, first of its kind, and OBVC, which is a political organization. So we get to engage with political leaders across Canada on a regular basis. And lastly, I'll say I'm a political and corporate consultant. So I try to help out with issues of mental health within a workplace or DEI issues within political spaces. And I'm very happy to be here.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. And lastly, we'll ask Mrs. Brenda Denso to please introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Brenda Danso. I am a member of the Church of Pentecost, PIWC North York Assembly. And so I'm a very familiar face. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I have my master's in social work. My background is actually in youth corrections from the US. And then I migrated here to Toronto. Since then, I've continued to work in the mental health field for over a total of 10 years now. So I work with youth who are at risk, as well as adults who are at risk with their mental health. And I also run an interior design practice. And so I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about my background as we continue as well. So again, thank you for having me.
All right, thank you very much. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
So yes, this is kind of the backwards approach to how you would.
So thank you to all our panelists for introducing yourselves. And then we'll just get right into our little discussion in our panel. So to begin, we're gonna ask kind of two questions in one. So what is mental health to you and what causes mental health problems? So whoever wants to take the floor and begin with that question.
Sure, I can start. And you said, so the first part is what is mental health? So I would say mental health is your overall well-being. So there's so many different dimensions to your overall well-being, right? So that could be you as a person, how you're doing emotionally, how you're doing physically, your environment, what does that look like? How are you impacted by it? Your occupation, how are things going for you there? Your relationship and your social connections, what does that look like as well? So when you look at all these different aspects and all these different dimensions, that makes up your overall mental health. So if one aspect is not going well, then as you see, you begin to be at risk. So your overall mental health and how you are doing holistically is really what mental health is. And there was a second part to the question. I'm sorry, Tora, if you can repeat that part.
Yeah, so the second part was, and what causes mental health problems?
Okay, so I think we'll dive more into that as we go on. But as I just mentioned, if there's all these different dimensions that I just talked about, like your environment, who you are as a person, how you're doing emotionally, physically, your occupational status, are you satisfied? Once we start to see that these different dimensions, that there's things happening that's negatively impacting you, or there's unsatisfaction in some of these areas, that's when you start to see that your mental health is starting to be impacted.
All right, and would any of our other panelists like to add to that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and a great job was done there, really mapping out the constellation of ideas and factors that contribute to our mental health issues. And what mental health is was a great definition. And dovetail off of that, I'll just say mental health is probably the most essential component to ensuring that your quality of life is really high. And so without feeling mentally healthy, it's really hard to secure a high quality of life because your perception might be off about that life for a variety of reasons. And they were listed there, but to summarize it even more briefly, there are situational, and environmental factors that contribute to your mental health being compromised. And there are biochemical aspects as to why your mental health might be compromised. So we'll probably dive into all of them very soon. So yeah.
All right. And probationary overseer Eli Azar, what is mental health to you, and what do you think causes mental health problems in general?
It's a big question, actually. Mental health to me, sometimes I'm really taking my time to make sure that I'm not confusing mental health with mental illness, because mental health isn't just not, feeling, depressed or anxious. Mental health is also, what am I doing to take care of my body? What am I doing to take care of my mind? How do I think about certain ideas? As our Dr. Joseph Smith just said, our perception, in environment, as Brenda has said as well. So mental health is not just always where we see, the downside, the bad side, but what are we also doing for ourselves? How do we carry on in life? From certain ages and for certain stages of our life, how have we matured? How have we, progressed? It's not just thinking that, well, I haven't hit rock bottom yet. No, what about where we're at and how do we grow from there? So when I think about mental health, I think about the growth, the progression, and not just the extremities that often we might attach to things of mental health, such as the illnesses and the like.
Agreed, yes. So then I'll move on to Mrs. Dora Poku. What do you think mental health is, and what causes mental health problems in general?
I think my predecessors have done a great job at outlining the different aspects of what mental health is, but it's pretty much what they've said, and is as Sister Brenda said, is your overall mental well-being. So emotionally, how do we cope with our emotions, our thoughts, whether positive or negative? How do we deal with that? Even our feelings, and also our ability to solve problems, because we live in a world that problems arises, whether big or small. So how do we even solve problems when problems comes our way? How do we overcome challenges and difficulties? How do we socially connect with people, and also being able to understand the world around us? All of that forms part of what our mental health is. So it's, for me personally, it's your mental well-being overall. So holistically, every aspect of what contributes to being mentally well-rounded, right? And in regards to what causes it, I think there's a lot of different things that cause it, as has been outlined already by Dr. Joseph. So we can't pinpoint one factor, because even within the scope of different mental health issues that may come up, when you look deep into, you find out there's different aspects of issues that actually caused it. What may surface at that time is just experience. Like when you have a cold, there are certain things that actually contributed to you having the cold. The cold is just the physical thing that we see. But if you go really underneath, there's a lot of things that when you break the net, you see there's a lot of cobwebs within that net that we have to deal with before we can actually get onto the overall. So I think, yeah, that's what I would say.
Definitely. Thank you guys for your in-depth answers. And I'll hand it over to Parissa to.
Thank you. First of all, I just realized that we, the moderators, forgot to introduce ourselves, so I'll do that quickly. So I'm Parissa, and that's Keturah, and we will be moderating this panel discussion. So as highlighted in the chat, if you have any questions, please send it to anyone who's labeled co-host, and we will pause and take it at any portion. So this is perfect. Thank you for all your feedback on what mental health is, and if this is a perfect segue. So how does one know if their mental health is being compromised or if it's just a bad day? How do you know, what is the line between I think I should get my mental health checked and if this is the bad day I'm experiencing?
I will speak from experience. So obviously from our panelists, I'm the one without the doctor thingy, but mine is more of a personal experience, having personally battled mental health in the past. And I think for me personally, the difference between having a bad day or a bad season and actually experience mental health issue is prolonged. So when we're having a bad day, yes, today I'm feeling down. It's okay for us to feel down. Next week I'm feeling down. But when there's a problem, Overseer Lisa was talking about progression. When it's been prolonged, so it's not just today that you're feeling down. It's not just tomorrow. It's not just next week, but even the following month, right? So there's a prolonged feeling of not being mentally stable, and that's not in the negative. So it can just be you feel overwhelmed, right? It starts like just feeling overwhelmed, and then you're feeling anxious. And then before you know it, your moods are changing. And it's something that's been going on for a while. Before you know it, the very things that you used to love doing, like for me, the very things that I used to love doing, eventually I started withdrawing myself from doing it. So you see that there's a change in who you normally have known yourself to be. And sometimes it goes to the extent where people may even notice it. Oh, before you used to be active in this or that, before you used to be talkative, but suddenly you've gone quiet. So it's not just a state, but it's a prolonged state that it brings changes to who you are as a person. So I would say that would be my answer to that.
I can jump in, I guess. Oh, that was a fabulous answer. And I like the juxtaposition you created between experience sometimes and, you know, people who might speak on these topics and give like clinical definitions and things like that. But I'd like to offer a quick analogy. You know, well, first and foremost, we're talking about now, I think we're talking about depression more so than mental health, because mental health has broad scope of things that, you know, it can manifest as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. Those are the biochemical ones. You have stress, anxiety, depression. But if we're talking about depression, the distinction between depression and sadness, for example, the analogy I like to use is that sadness is almost like a jellyfish. So it's like something swimming through your life, and then there are these sudden shocks or stings, and they may linger a while, but you know it's going to pass. Whereas depression is more so like an octopus. And when I think of it as like the core of that octopus's head and its tentacles spread out and reach out and grab whatever is in its reach, and it keeps it locked in and stuck there. And so when you think about the way you interpret all sorts of external phenomenon, your relationship with your parents, your relationship with your significant other, your church experiences, your school experiences, playing video games, whatever it might mean, all of them are thematically now colored under the category of depression. Like you're feeling like things are darker, more gray, less enjoyable. And some of the symptoms of that could be loss of appetite, weight loss. It could be random mood swings, bouts of crying, bouts of smiling, right? All these sorts of strange symptomatic manifestations that are hard to always capture. But I, you know, it was expressed really well just before me. It's about depth and breadth, right? So the depth of the experience of something in your day-to-day, you know, life circumstances, and then the breadth of it. How wide is that experience in terms of what it's covering and what it's attaching itself to? And so I too, I'm a survivor in many respects of bouts of depression and more chronic forms of depression in my teenage years and early 20s. And I come from a household where I saw my mother experience depression for years and years and years. And so, you know, when you think about environmental factors contributing to it, intergenerational factors contributing to it, and then biochemistry could be off within somebody's cognitive apparatus. So there's so many different things that can contribute to it, but some of the symptoms are exactly what was expressed. Sometimes loss of appetite, you can't sleep, random bouts of mood swings and things like that.
Wow, that's amazing. The more so when you say, I remember when you were talking before, you did mention that there was biochemical, physical, environmental. So are those all different things that can impact your mental health? And how do you know the difference of what is impacting? So, yeah.
Yeah, you might not be able to tell the difference between what's impacting you or not. And right, so, you know, sometimes in your early teenage years, you might have to get a diagnosis because it could be biochemical and it might not have anything to do with trauma, or it might not have anything to do with intergenerational trauma being passed down to you. So there's like traumas in your experiences, then the intergenerational piece, experiences of your forefathers passed down to you, or environmental conditions, right? So like systems and structures not operating the way they're meant to, and then it's reducing your quality of life and thus reducing your perception of yourself and your life experiences. The biochemical piece is out of our control completely, right? Like you could be born that way, or something could develop over time within your biochemistry. And when we talk about biochemistry, we're talking about the different chemicals within your brain that, you know, fire off signals to other parts of your brain or allow signals to be transmitted. So serotonin, a neurotransmitter, we often think of it as like a happy drug in the brain, like a happy chemical. And there could be blockages, or the messages could be interrupted because of something that triggers it from outside. But then now, after it's been triggered, there is a deep biochemical issue, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's something that predates your existence, right? You were biologically set up to be that way. So all these factors work together in many respects, right? Like rarely is it that you have a situational occurrence and an intergenerational occurrence without the biochemical piece attaching itself to it. They typically work together, but sometimes you could exclusively have a biochemical deficiency and you're 12 years old, you have no clue what's going on to you, and everything's just off. And then now you've been diagnosed with depression.
Okay, got it. Learn something new. Alisa and Brenda, do you have anything else to add on to that? How do you know if you're suffering or if your mental health is taking a decline as opposed to it just being a bad day or season?
Yeah, I would like to add to what Dr. Joseph has said, and I really love the analogy of the jellyfish and the octopus because it really shows the range and also perhaps the severity, right? Because I think one question that I always or often hear is, how do I know, or I have lots of bad days, or this has happened in my life, right? So I think it's also really important to think about where you are in life in terms of, has there been something that occurred situationally that has perhaps contributed to you being in a very low state or you feeling depressed, right? So Dr. Joseph also spoke on that. So because there could be situational depression, right? Meaning it's passing, like we talked about that jellyfish, right? So it's, I think, one really important thing, because I think oftentimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to assess. And because as, minorities, and I think speaking as a racialized individual or even just being Black, we're so resilient. And so oftentimes when we're going through bouts of depression, something has perhaps contributed to it, but because we don't really do what's needed, or we don't go and get assessed when we find that it's occurring for too long and we just keep dealing with it, sometimes this meant, the depression is maintained and it can actually progress or worsen, right? So I think one important note is that we should not always put the onus on ourselves or the pressure on ourselves to do that assessment and try to figure things out, because you can simply just go to your family doctor, for example, and say, hey, you know what? this is how I've been feeling. I've been feeling like that for 2 weeks. They may monitor, ask you questions, do an assessment, and it could be situational, right? Or perhaps you have been depressed for your entire 15 years of life or 20 years of life and not really realize it because that's always been your baseline. That's always how you felt. So you haven't really actually recognized that that is not the norm, right? So that's the importance of really seeking, whether it's your family doctor or professional, to really just indulge in that conversation. Just because you're doing that consultation does not mean that the next level is getting a medication or necessarily being diagnosed, right? It's an assessment and it's a consultation just for you to gather information. So I feel like that is really important because unfortunately, a lot of us do have depression, right? And it's not situational. We've been living with it for so long that it's become our norm, and we just are unhappy and dissatisfied in life, and we just continue to go on day to day, right? So I think one thing is deciding or assessing, is it situational? Did something just happen in my life? How long have I been feeling like this? Trying to think about that. And then also looking at, how is this impacting me on a day-to-day? How motivated am I? And I think Dr. Joseph spoke about some of the symptoms that perhaps we may dive into a little bit as well. So again, I think if you've taken anything out of what I've said is not feeling the pressure to assess yourself. If you are feeling a bit off, simply go and get a consultation with your family doctor or a clinician if you're not comfortable with your family doctor because maybe they're linked to your family, for example, right? Just go out and seek a professional just to gather some information.
Perfect, thank you. Probationary officer, Olive, I knew I was coming to you, like you're smiling.
I have no other things to
No
add.
other?
Everybody has done a
Yes.
great job with
Yes,
explaining it
yes.
in detail.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, so for our next question, in your experience, how are mental health issues, whether it's depression, anxiety, different forms of mental health issues, affecting young people today? Whether it's the young people that you've worked with personally or that you see in society today, how are mental health issues affecting young people today in your experience?
One big thing I'm seeing right now with young people that I work with in the schools is huge decision making, especially with negotiation of their peer relationships. With the whole pandemic and not being able to socialize, many peers are now looking at their friend groups and seeing, well, is this person really my friend? Did they like my pictures when I posted them? Were they checking in on me? It's time to do an inventory, and they're reorganizing their peer groups. They're looking at life to see if there's certain decisions with pathways into the future or even their emotional statuses. So a lot of it is based on decision making right now, and mental health is really impacting them because it's going to give them the direction of where do they want to go, who is their priority, what is their priority. And with those pressures all hitting them all at once right now, it's taking some of them aback, right? Some of them maybe are not feeling as confident as they were about facing the future, the uncertain future, the future that may be a little bit more demanding on skills that they did not have, maybe not even knowing if their friend groups or their peer groups or their family groups are even able to sustain them during such times. So it's huge decision making right now, and this is kind of what I'm seeing right now, and it's scary. A lot of these youth, they've grown up really fast, but you're also wondering, are they going to be able to make the right decisions right now and be able to have that as a piecemeal for the next stages of their life. So that's what I'm personally seeing right now, my experience.
Great, thank you so much for that. And if anyone would like to go next and share their experience.
I think one thing I wanted to add to what our overseer has said is that I think one thing is important to note is that anxiety is actually normal and that we all experience it, right? Because I think oftentimes we get anxiety and we get more anxious, right? But one thing to remind yourself is that it's completely normal. Anxiety is like that fire alarm. It serves a purpose. I mean, a lot of people utilize anxiety to actually excel and do well in so many different aspects, right? So when you think about the normalcy of anxiety, think about when you had that job interview or when you had that test, or you had something really important and you were anxious about it. That is entirely normal, right? And then our overseer was talking about, our youth and younger ones, young adults, and just even adults in general too, making important decisions, right? And I think some of these situations can be anxiety provoking, but I think oftentimes we don't talk enough about the skills or the strategy to be able to challenge our anxiety, right? Because oftentimes we may have certain thoughts that worry us, and it may not actually be a rational thought, but because we start believing it, or because of our perspective, we start to get overly worried over something that we probably don't even have evidence for, something that we really shouldn't be worried about because we are perhaps fortune telling or predicting, right? So I think one important thing about when we're looking at anxiety is first remembering that it is normal. However, if you're recognizing that you are on a day-to-day anxious, or that anxiety is starting to get in the way of things for you, it's important to, again, I continue to say seek out support, because one thing I notice is in working with clients is that when they come for support around life decisions or anxiety around decision making or important things or transitions that's happening in their life, they almost feel like they are not worthy of receiving therapy for that service. But you are very worthy of receiving therapy for that service, because life transitions are, it's anxiety provoking, and it can cause a lot of stressors in our life. And so you don't need to seek out support because you are depressed and been depressed for 20 years, right? You can seek out support if you are recognizing that you are continuously anxious about something. To you, it may not be like a big deal. It may be a decision that's not even, you feel like it's not as important. However, if you're recognizing that on a day-to-day, you continue to experience anxiety, that may be your cue that you need to actually speak to someone to help you problem solve, or to even listen to you. And it could be by the form of counseling and not necessarily therapy. So I think that's important to just be mindful of that, so you are not continuing to have all these stressors and deal with it independently, or try to deal with it independently.
I could jump in if that's yeah. No, really, again, really happy to be in this space, talking about mental health for so many reasons, and hopefully I get to gush over it. But what I wanted to pick up on was something that we might not always recognize, and that's maybe the importance of contextualizing the problem of the modern era. We are living in the safest time period ever on Earth, despite what you see in the media or what your friends might say. We're also living in the most affluent time period ever on Earth, meaning that if you are from a lower income community like myself, living in public housing or metro housing like I was, you're living better than an 18th century king, which demonstrates to me, when I think about the kind of mental health challenges in my old neighborhood or the mental health challenges in our community, demonstrates that the crisis of the modern era is not one of quantity. It's not about like physical safety or actual resources we need to garner. It's more of quality, which speaks to Probationary Overseer's comments about the pressure of making choices. The reason why there's so much pressure on those choices is because those choices add value or take away value from your life, right? What we think is that they add worth to your life or take away worth from your life. And so it's a qualitative challenge, not a quantitative challenge. And for me, I found that living or growing up in the Jane Finch community, the quality of my life experiences was curtailed or reduced because of class and racism. And so I would go into an environment, and because people were classist and made judgments about my area code, now my quality of experiences is lower. And so if they project a life choice that's valuable, I don't believe I deserve that life choice because they've already set up a hierarchy of where I stand. And that affected how I perceived myself and I perceive other people. Even though I was able to buy all the latest shoes, even though I was always able to get my bus tickets to get to where I was going, or I had extra money to, it wasn't so much about poverty that was challenging for me. It was people's perceptions of my impoverished state. And so it's about quality, not quantity. At least that's how I position the crisis of the modern era. And when I think about the young people I'm dealing with, they're being challenged to, and as we all are as believers, they're being challenged to cultivate a singular relationship with Christ. And the reason why is that's so essential is because without that, you fall into the trap of comparisons, right? One of the most essential themes within our biblical tradition is the idea of incommensurability, meaning that everybody's worth is inherent and cannot be measured against anybody else's. But we fall victim to the world in which everybody's trying to measure each other's worth and value based upon choices that are made or not made, or choices that are out of our hands. And so I find a lot of young people feeling compromised emotionally and mentally because they never know if they're making choices that are going to add value to their life, real value that other people will recognize them for. And that's where our faith comes in, which adds another dimension to this conversation around mental health. Because when I'm in secular spaces, I can't speak about it in this way. When I'm in this space, I'll have to use a different concept to reference God. I'll talk about something else like the infinite or something that's transcending your particular environment or situation. But I think here we can speak frankly. And that's the missing link in many respects, but it's an authentic relationship, because without that, you're back to the realm of comparison and measuring, right? Whose relationship is better and who's doing this more than the other person. So just sorry for going on a bit longer, but I just wanted to add that contextual component, right? It's not quantity that is at stake for us, which I know for many people it is, but that's not really the heart of it. It's quality of experiences, and whether other people are going to recognize how qualitative or qualified my life is in comparison to theirs.
I definitely agree. I know that a lot of people are experiencing those comparisons even today. So yeah, I agree. Mrs. Dora Poku, if you would like to add anything to this question about how you think mental health is affecting especially young people today, and in your experience, if you would like to add.
I think just to piggyback what Dr. Joseph said towards the ending of his speech in regards to our beliefs, I think one thing that I have come to notice recently is the pressure from within Christendom. So being a COP member, I mean, having been to other churches, but the pressure to be perfect, right? So in our walk with Christ, the pressure that, for example, Eli Azar is now a pastor, there are certain qualities that he's expected to display. I'm a youth leader, there's certain qualities I'm expected to display. I go to the Church of Pentecost, there's certain qualities. I'm a child of God, there are certain qualities. And rightly so, there are certain qualities that we are expected to display, because if we do say that we are children of God, then we are supposed to be conformed to his image, right? But that has now become pressure, whereby a lot of young people feel pressure to be perfect, right? And so we're talking about comparison. I see a lot of young people comparing themselves not to Christ, but we are comparing ourselves to our youth leaders, to our pastors, to our choirs, whatnot. So the people above us that we think our lives are supposed to be like them, that's what we are comparing ourselves to. And that doesn't give us the leeway to, I always tell people, to abuse grace and therefore walk anyhow that we want, because I'm not supposed to compare myself to my youth and whatnot. And so I'm just going to walk in sin. But this thing whereby I have to be perfect, the way I speak have to be perfect, the way I do this have to be perfect. And so a lot of young people are suffering because they are not meeting that perfection standard, right? Though we have been called to be perfect, but we are in the stage of perfection. We are not there yet. We are being conformed to the image of Christ. And so the moment that young people find themselves being pressured to do this, majority of the time, the decisions that they make in their pursuit of perfection ends up being negative, right? Because they want to please us as leaders, not necessarily because they've gained an understanding of who they are in Christ and what is expected from them from the eye view of God, but because this is what has been projected on me from my leaders as this is what I'm supposed to. So I think that's one of the key issues that's affecting young people that I've recently interacted with. So maybe as a church, as going back to draw them back to building a solid relationship with God themselves. And so them understanding it from that point. So if they are doing anything, if they're making in life decisions is their relationship with God and how they understand it from that perspective, instead of I'm doing it to please A, B, or C, or even my parents. So I think for me, that's what I would take from that question.
Can I quickly say something too?
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to monopolize the space at all. I just get excited about this, but what you said about perfection is just so profound and so important for us to just sit with for a second. A lot of people hold on, and this is just from my own research and background, they hold on to almost an ancient notion of the word perfection. So in the ancient world, to be perfect meant that you could be seen, touched, tasted, or smelled, to be of profound quality in a never changing way. So you're unchanging and you're always that thing, and you always smell, taste, sound, touch, and feel the same, right? That is not the biblical notion of perfection. The biblical notion of perfection is about reconciliation, reconciling oneself to Christ, reconciling oneself to one's neighbor, right? And reconciling oneself to both of those entities on the basis of love. That is not what the ancient world believed, right? So I think we fall victim to this idea that's been lingering within human history for so long. And that's about being perfect on the surface, right? I look, I smell, I sound, I taste, and I'm never changing. I'm always fixed in this particular spot, but human beings are ever changing. And so it's a false and erroneous notion of perfection. It's actually like a marble statue. That's the notion of perfection we hold in our head. None of us on this call can be marble statues, right? And even marble statues can't be marble statues because they change and they deteriorate and they fail. That's the point, but it's an ancient notion. So we need to be very critical about the type of idea of perfection that we hold on to, because it does contribute to our depression.
Oh, perfect. I actually had, I don't know if this was a question or a comment, but picking from the things you guys have touched on, when Brenda was speaking at some certain point, she mentioned a baseline, and that most people they probably don't even know that the baseline they've been operating at is probably not even the optimum that they could be, or their mental health might not be at the best that it could be. So a question that came to mind was, what baseline should we be operating at? Like, we know if someone is not looking good, you can tell. If someone, like, it's easier to tell certain things that are physical, but with mental health, like, you can't really see. So is it you doing what makes you feel good? Like, how do you know that a baseline you're operating at is good for you? Because certain people might be operating from a toxic mentality. As you said, you mentioned that certain things have been passed down, that you only know certain things based on the environment or your level of exposure. So where are we taking this baseline to, where it's like, okay, I can safely say that being at this point is good for me, not just for myself, but for people around me as well? Everyone look to the sky.
I think that's a really good question. And so everyone's baseline is going to be entirely different, right? So I have clients, for example, where I, in some way, am judging because when I look at their progress, I feel like we need to go a little bit more because I feel like they need to be doing more. They need to have an increased satisfaction. Maybe they're scaling themselves as a 5 in terms of satisfaction. I'm like, no, we got to get you to a 7 or 7.5. But then I go back to asking them, how are you feeling? What is your goal? Are you happy with your work right now? Where would you scale yourself? As an example, they may say 5. And I'm thinking like, again, we all judge, right? I'm thinking like, oh, okay, that's actually low. But it's me asking them like, is this where you need to be? And sometimes they're like, yeah, I'm actually content with where I am. And this is good enough for me as far as job satisfaction, as an example, right? When it comes to my environmental satisfaction, whether I'm living at home with my parents, what's happening there, am I satisfied, right? And so we start to, again, go back to the dimensions of our well-being. And that's how we're able to really start assessing, am I happy in this area? What about this area? What about when it comes to my faith and spirituality, my connection and my relationship with God, right? Because that's also a dimension that impacts us as well. So I think that it's important to do that self-assessment. However, if you recognize that maybe you are telling yourself like, everything's fine, I'm actually okay at this baseline, but you're recognizing that on a day-to-day, perhaps you are unable to do certain things, or you're not as social anymore. So that's why it's important to kind of know what your baseline has been that you've been operating at. So that way, when things are actually starting to decline, you will actually be aware of it, right? So that's what it's important to. So you can do that. If you Google 8 dimensions of wellness, you'll actually see, you can kind of do a mini assessment yourself, right? So you can kind of see overall, what's my satisfaction right now, right? And on a day-to-day, am I actually happy in my life, right? Because then that will start giving you a sign that, okay, maybe I need to start paying attention to things, or maybe I need to go consult, or maybe I need to check in because I'm actually not sure if this is the norm of what I should be operating at, right? So I think it's an individual assessment, but you can start with the 8 dimensions of wellness, just as, again, it's just a starting point for yourself. But, I would say, again, if you're unsure, seek, professional advice, so that way you can make sure that you are well supported and that you're living at your optimal potential, right?
That's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, so a question that we have is actually from the chat, or another house rule that we wanted to let you know. So if anyone in the audience who is listening has a question or wants to talk, just raise your hand and then we can give you the floor, so you can unmute yourself and speak, or you can put it in the chat as well. So one question that was sent to me was, is it usual for you to start noticing changes in your mental health once you get closer to God?
Yes.
It's one of
And
those
by
yes or no
and
questions.
yeah, no, I'll add on. I believe that as you grow more and more in your faith, I think you become anchored by that which would constitute a proper baseline for yourself, right? We're talking about standards of measurement. Worldly standards of measurement typically lead you astray, whereby you end up comparing every single thing that you do to things that are quite superficial. Whereas if you're rooting yourself in that which would, comprise a faithful life, I think that you end up developing a new standard, and that would color your perception of things. But I mean, an authentic standard, right? Not something where you're being judgy, but you're being thoughtful about the way in which you proceed and go about your life and engage with people. And so, yeah, I think that your mental health grows in a positive direction and in a positive way the closer and closer you are in your relationship with God.
Beautiful.
I would say definitely yes as well. I found that for me, that was one of the major keys that helped me to overcome my mental health, my growth and depth in my personal relationship with God. And Dr. Joseph was talking about authentic. And I think that's a very, very key word, because many a times we think we have a relationship with God, but it's not really authentic. Again, it's what has been projected on us, or what we think an authentic relationship with God is. I mean, if we compare our relationships with friends around us, we know relationships that are authentic. So that friend that is there, just to go by, right? And it's that type of same thing. If we can honestly sit back and assess our personal relationship with God, I believe that we ourselves can know whether our relationship with Him is authentic. And so in my personal experience, when I started to really accept who I am in Christ, so my identity. So there's one thing to know who you are in Christ, and there's a total different thing to accept who you are in Christ. And so, yes, the Bible will talk about you are the head and not beneath. You are a child of God and all of that stuff. But if you yourself do not accept it, it's like it just goes in one ear and just comes out, right? So believing who you are in Christ, I think, is really, really key to be able to be grounded when it comes to mental health, to accept. So no longer, as Dr. Joseph said, no longer is it what people say, no longer is it what society says, no longer is it even what my pastor or whoever says, but it's what Christ says. And we know that what he says is final. So I think developing an authentic, deep relationship with God is really, really vital.
The question is very profound. And I think, yes, definitely as you draw near to Christ and he draws near to you, he holds up the mirror and you see a lot of the things that we will say that are imperfections, the sin, the works of the flesh that we're shedding off, right? These are the things that we as Christians have to accept, that we are flawed. And, you know, Christ is the perfect one. And he's trying to make us like him as we walk with him daily. Even in the scripture, Apostle Paul says that it's no longer that I live, but Christ who lives in me, right? The end of this life in our flesh is the beginning of our new life in Christ. And with that comes with a total transformation of the mind, a total acceptance of a new will, all of these things that would affect your mental health. And yes, when we talk about mental health, we use different things. We say conscious, we say behaviors, thoughts, but this is all really basically spiritual things of the will, the heart. You know, who do we accept to follow? Who do we now look to help and counsel us, right? These are the things now that when we come to Christ, we can definitely say that our mind is going to change. And for those of us who have had personal experiences and accepting, you know, Christ as our Lord and personal Savior, this is the walk and this is the talk that we do. We know that, you know, with mental health, it's not going to be as the world accepts. This is how we look at Christ and what we've called on him and how we accept what he has for us in life. It's a total restoration of life, which means there's going to be a lot of conflict within the flesh to let go of certain things and ideas and practices and behaviors that we've held on for so long, that we thought were conforming to our identity, but it's no longer that anymore.
And one thing that I would add is, as I continue to talk about the dimensions of wellness, because hopefully now we understand it's holistic, right? There's different aspects that we look at. I think that as believers, our relationship with God is the strongest protective factor that we have, right? And that's something that's so special because we have that. And so as we deal with adversity or we deal with whether it's depression or anxiety, one thing that, I think research has also shown, and perhaps Dr. Joseph can speak to this, it's definitely a protective factor if you have a strong relationship with God, because your faith is stronger, you are more strengthened, and you are able to actually get through certain situations because that is such a high protective factor. So that's why oftentimes when believers go through adversity and at the end of it all, and they lean closer to their faith and lean closer to God, at the end of it all, they give that testimony because that really helped them get through that adversity. So I want to also highlight that in the event that you are going through adversity, it does not mean that your faith is weak, because I think that was one of the questions that I saw. So I don't want that misconception either, right? We all go through adversity. And so if you are going through something, or your mental health is at risk, or you recognize things are happening, it's just really cueing you to, again, draw closer to the Lord and lean towards the word and use that also as a protective factor. I think that is really important. So I think don't let your self-esteem be impacted if things are not going well, because I think oftentimes there's a stigma that if you are going through something or you're going through adversity, it's because your faith is not strong enough. So I think that we definitely want to separate the two and make sure that we are not falling into that misconception.
Might I just quickly add to, profound commentary there. I think the deeper your faith is, I think the more you grow in terms of wisdom to appreciate how difficult it is to be a person in the world. It is very, very hard to be an authentic human being, never mind an authentic person that's trying to be spiritual or trying to be faithful. I don't think we always appreciate the stages of development that got us here. Like, we all show up on the screen today, looking nice, looking dapper, looking fresh, or everyone's good, everyone's smiling. But in your earliest years, in your most formative years, the impressions you were receiving from people around you were that you were inferior, whether they tried to or not. You started off young and small, unable to do a lot of things. That creates an inferiority complex to some degree. You are also receiving preferences at that early stage, preferences you didn't have a ability to decide upon, right? It's about what the culture around you was presenting to you. All of that came at your most formative years, and they congeal over time to form prejudices, and then that could lead to actions that are dictated by a certain perception of the world. That's a lot to traverse and overcome, right? So by your teenage years, you've been socially conditioned to think and operate in certain ways. And then we're asking you on this call to transcend that and develop a stronger relationship with God, and your faith will lead you through. Well, that's not easy, right? So I think the deeper you are in your faith, the more you'll appreciate the journey and the process and how much you have to overcome in order to get to that place of equanimity, of equilibrium, of mental peace and repose.
Just to add on, when Ms. Brenda was talking, just a thought just came to mind that the deeper you do realize that you're not the only person, you're not the first person. If we actually look throughout scripture, you do actually find instances of strong men of God and women of God that went through mental health issues. And I just wrote down quickly some of them. You have Elijah having literally called down fire from heaven to consume the prophets of Baal. And now you have a woman rise up, and just by her words, the prophet that literally like just a couple of minute ago did such miraculous event is now running for his life and literally telling God to like kill me, right? You look at the life of David, you just have to just look at the book of Psalms and you see the different stages of mental issues that he went through. You look at Jesus at the Garden of Gethsemane, whereby knowing the punishment and what he is yet to do, the Bible talks about the fact that during his prayers, his sweat literally turned to blood. We look at the life of Joseph. We might think being sold by your brother is an easy thing to go through, right? All of these people went through different stages of mental health issues, whether that's anxiety, depression, and the list goes on. But when we come close to Christ, we see, how did these people get through it, right? How were they able to get through? How did Elijah, a big man of God, go through? How did Jesus Christ go through it? We also see that the Apostle Paul, the Bible lets us understand that he had a thorn in his flesh, right? For us, such a thorn could have caused a mental issue. What if he was depressed about that thorn? Because the Bible talks about he went to God 3 times praying for him to take that thorn away. But in the end, what was his word to him? That my strength is made perfect in your weakness. Jesus in his word tells us that if you want to be my disciple, pick up your cross and follow me. And for me personally, when I look at that scripture, I look at it as, what is your cross, right? What is that mental issue that has become a cross? And so if it has become a cross, his word for you tonight is pick it up and follow me, right? No matter what it is, it says, cast all your cares and your burdens on me, for I care for you. I think many times we think just because we might be going through a mental issue, that's it with us and God, but he actually cares for you. What he wants you to do is come at his feet and pour it on under his feet, right? And he would take care of it. So I'll say definitely having a strong faith really, really does help, for sure.
Yes, I agree with all of the answers that were given. So our next question is, in your opinion, what causes many to struggle in silence with their mental health issues or whatever mental health problems that they're going through?
I'll definitely say the stigma with it is a huge issue, especially within our communities, the Black community. We're so used to pushing forward and keeping it moving and, just leaving all signs of weakness behind us. But because of that stigma, it doesn't allow us to properly situate ourselves and to call, what we're going through, an actual thing. So, we hear it a lot, but it's very true. The stigma is a huge thing. It's a deterrent. We don't want to deal with it. We know that it's not becoming of us. It's not something that we would love to label, especially if we are people who can be, prideful and not think that we're not susceptible to weakness. Then we carry on and we don't realize that we're actually burning ourselves out. And, we also then, as all of us have talked about in our offerings, that we become, pretty much ungenuine. Like we don't present ourselves well anymore, right? When we can confront the stigma, when we can confront the reality of mental health, that's when we can actually understand, who we really are, whom we really belong to, and stop living the lie that we are these people who can't deal with these situations. So I think that's one big thing that presents as a challenge to people who are suffering in silence with mental health.
I would say also within the Black community, if we actually look at where we come from as Africans, majority of us are Africans, that word doesn't actually, it doesn't exist in our vocabulary. So for example, I'm Ghanaian. If you go to Ghana, mental health does not exist in the Ghanaian vocabulary. So if you talk about somebody is not mentally well, they'll think, oh my God, the person in the hospital, right? So because that word does not exist, even to be able to, as young people, go to your parents to tell them something is going on, look at you like, you're exaggerating, right? So because that word does not exist, it's very, very hard for young people to come out. Another thing that obviously I was talking about stigma is the stigma of being a Christian. I think Mrs. Brenda spoke about it earlier. You are a Christian. What do you mean you're depressed? What do you mean you're feeling anxious? What do you mean you're having low, where's your faith? Don't you believe in God? So that I'm a Christian, and so therefore I'm supposed to be okay. I'm supposed to be, as Dr. Joseph said earlier, I'm supposed to be perfect. And so because of that, somebody put in the chat, we are scared to be vulnerable because of what's expected of us as believers. And also I think sometimes life decisions. So for example, I may be taking a course and I've been advised, don't take this course because it might be A, B, or C. I'm in a relation, don't be in this relation because A, B, or C will happen. When the consequences of what we have been advised not to happen, because we are scared of what people are going to say, I told you so, I'd rather just keep to myself and just suffer in silence. And I think that's one of the things that people would rather just, I'll just suffer alone because I was told at the end of the day I never listened. So I think that's what I want to add.
I actually wanted to segue that into another question. So as believers, we turn these things into prayer points. And so at what point do we move from not just saying that, okay, I'm just going to keep praying and not act on it? At what point do you transition? And I was even in the chat, at what point do you say, okay, I need to seek professional help, or I need to go beyond the secret place and just actually talk to someone, because the solution might be with just seeking help physically? So at what point do we take that next step?
I think before we fully answer that question, Parisa, I wanted to also add, I think one thing that we really struggle with is validating ourselves and validating each other, right? And I always give this example of my now 6-year-old, where when she was 4 or 5, and even now at 6, she'll tell me like, oh, I hurt myself and it hurt really bad. And I'm like, oh, it doesn't hurt. And she's like, but it does for me, right? And so I always think about that example of when she says it does for me, right? And so it's just an example of how I'm invalidating her experience. She has experienced something. She is telling me it hurts. And I'm saying, no, it doesn't, because to me, from my perspective, I'm feeling like it shouldn't hurt, right? And so I think that's oftentimes a response that we get from others when we experience something or we're going through something and we share it. And it's like, well, pray and everything's going to be fine. That very well may be true. However, at what point do we validate each other to say, yeah, you know what, it makes sense why you are feeling this way because this happened, right? So that validation part is often lost, or even us validating ourselves. Right. So I just went through this difficult situation, or this just happened. So it makes sense that I am experiencing this emotion. Right. So I think as we segue into the question you asked, Parisa, I think validation of self and validating each other, we definitely need to slow things down and, do a better job at validating each other's experience, because again, our perspective is different. Our resilience is also different. And in addition to that, we already have really high expectation of ourselves, which is why we endure suffering much longer than we actually should.
Thank you. That was very, very insightful as well. Yes, so the next question that I had asked that we segue to is, at what point do you go to seek help? And I think Mary has kind of phrased that question in a different way, where she says, usually when people get depressed, people will frame it as it being a spirit of depression or like demonic oppression. But then at what point do you move from that and say, okay, these are resources that we can use to help, and it's not just let's pray about it or let's just see what's going on?
There's a great verse in the Bible that I think can really bring light to this. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 14, it says, where there's no guidance, a people falls, but in the abundance of counselors, there's safety. So I believe that it's always good for us to, start off with, our prayers, just figuring out, God being the one who created us. He can ultimately, answer our prayers. He can heal us. He can address the things concerning our mind. If we do go to pastors, if we do go to elders, leaders of the church, and we don't also complement this with other supports, other counselors, people who have, very good training in trying to break down, the layers of one's behavior and how the mind works, then we're kind of doing ourselves a disservice, because God also provided medication. God also provided, healing in different ways through, other people, laying of hands, right? He has allowed other people to also have that power and ability on the earth. And these people are professional helpers, right? So there can be total safety in going to people who are therapists, who are counselors, people that can also help you complement your faith experiences and your faith beliefs in those things of mental health, behavioral assessment, and the like, right? So where you want to be willing in your looking for supports is to try to see who else can come on board and help you. Those people who are professional and have also that formal training as well.
Perfect. Does anyone else want to add to that, or? Okay, so in this, with a follow-up question to this is, how can the church properly help and also provide resources for those going through mental health problems? So as we've gathered here, what can the church or we as individuals in the community take away to help ourselves and people around us?
I can probably speak for COP. So for COP, I think God has blessed us with wisdom. God has blessed us with people that are not just spiritual, but also educationally sound. I mean, he's the one that's given us the ability and the grace for the intelligence that we have. And so we have people like Mrs. Brenda, we have people like Overseer Eli Azar. I don't know if Dr. Joseph Alcim doesn't go to COP. So even within our sphere, there are people, they are believers. We know, because I know with Pentecost, sometimes we are kind of worried about the information that our young people will receive because we don't know the faith of the person and their background. But if we look at our scope, there are people that have the education, that have the knowledge, that have the wisdom, and also have God attached to it. So I think it will be very, very necessary that if the church can form a body of, we have the social work association, so maybe Pentecost Social Work Association, whereby these people are, they have the knowledge and they have the experience and they are grounded in Christ, just to give the holistic approach when it comes to mental health, instead of us being worried about if we send our young person to this person, we don't know what advice they're giving them. The resources are here. Why don't we just form a body of people and let us deal with the issue instead of pretending as if the issues are not there? Because is with what's happening right now, it's only going to get worse if we don't tackle the issue from the root. So I think it's high time we stop pretending as if it's not there, and like somebody put in the chat, stop making it seem like everything is demonic, and just get to the issue.
I think one thing that we can do, even as individuals, as members, is being generous with each other, because I find that there's such high distress within the community. I know that there have been youth who have had a strong urge to reach out to me for support, but they're not confident that the conversation that I'm going to have with them is going to be confidential. First of all, I'm bound by social work, by the social work college, to multiple colleges, to where, I report to that. And so if you, at one point have thought about reaching out to me, but you kind of had that uncertainty, so you did not reach out. It's unfortunate. I hope you'll reach out to someone else if you feel like there's a conflict, but that's something that I think is important to know, that in as much as we attend the same church, doesn't mean that we're going to be going, that I'm going to then phone overseer and say, hey, guess what's happening? Or call Dr. Joseph and say, hey, this youth or this person just called me. Again, that is not professional. That is not something that we are to do. That is not something I do. And I know that my colleagues, I want to speak for them as well. I know that they are not doing that as well. And so I think it's important to just have that grace with each other, and just be generous with each other, so we can start feeling comfortable to have certain conversations. Because in as much as we sit here as looking like we're perfect, we know that we are all sinners and we have all fallen short at one point, and we all have experienced life. And so I think it's important that sometimes people look at us leaders and feel like, oh, well, this person's too perfect, so I don't feel comfortable going to them to have this conversation. So I think that's one thing we need to work on. And then also, building a relationship with the leaders and also just with each other. So that way, I think it's important, if it is a leader who has a professional background or who can give you sound counseling or advice, I think that's really important, to be able to reach out to them. And I think that our sister Dora also said it would be great to have that body, because we have so much resource and so much professionals in the church that are well experienced. And even if you are not seeing me or overseer, we have a lot of resources where you can seek other supports, so that way if there isn't a conflict of interest. So I think, again, there's so much support and resources. It requires you actually asking questions, and seeking out for help. So that's really important.
Awesome. There was one question that I wanted to present, because I think I'd heard it before. One of you mentioned that there was a distinct difference between counseling and therapy. And I wanted to ask if you could please shed some more light on it, because I didn't realize there was a difference. And I think many on the line might assume that they're the same thing. So as we're wrapping up, just to shed more light on that as well. And then Keturah will take the last question.
Sure, I can speak a little bit to that. So, for example, your pastor can counsel you, right? Provide counsel. So think about someone giving you counsel. Your friend can give you counsel, right? And then you can also go to a professional to get psychotherapy services where you're getting counseling. However, the difference between therapy is that there is a goal attached to it. So if you are coming and saying, hey, I'm dealing with anxiety or I'm dealing with depression, we're going to gather some information, do an assessment, right? And also see, what is the goal? What are we looking to meet, right? And so the difference with therapy is that it is goal driven. So that means that the work that we're doing is going to be evidence-based. You're not just going to come in and vent and tell me, hey, all this stuff is going on. I'm going to say, Sister Parisa, everything's going to be, you're an amazing person. And, we may look at some perspective taking, but then at the end you leave, and then that's it. And you keep coming back. I listen, I give you counsel, you leave, right? So that's counseling. Therapy is, okay, so as you leave, here are some things that we're going to actually do, right? Here are some strategies that I'm going to give you. I am holding you accountable that in between sessions, you are actually going to practice these skills and practice this strategy. And when we come back, we're going to reassess. You're going to let me know the skills and strategies that we're using. Is it working? So we should be able to assess if the work that we're doing and the treatment modality that we're using, is it working? Is it not working? So that way, again, because at the end, we know that this is the goal that you're supposed to achieve. Maybe the goal is that your anxiety will be reduced to the point where now you will be able to attend school. or your depression will be better manageable so that way on a day-to-day you're feeling more satisfied in life and you're doing the things that you used to do. So again, we are assessing that progress. And so if we've been seeing each other for 3 months and there's no movement, there's no progress, that means that we need to look at the therapy that we're doing because something is not working, right? And so again, that's the difference between therapy, is it's often goal driven, and we are going to set goals so that way we can actually assess and make sure that we are meeting the goals, whereas counseling could be that you continue to get counsel, whether it's you're doing better or not, we may not assess, but you're, excuse me, getting that ongoing support.
Really, really helpful. Did anyone have anything to add on to that?
So, not to add on to Brenda's comment, which she did very well. I think to go back to like how we could go into the church, and I can't remember the question exactly. I think it was talking about like how do we get support from like our church community. Was that the question?
Yes, that
Okay.
and resources, how the church can provide resources as well.
Okay, I think that's a great question, because the church is a community, and we all know that. We know that because of the diverse people who come with different needs. We know also with the type of work that we do with every individual. And we know that, you know, a church has to be able to support the people that are part of their membership. So I know with COP, I know with even other churches as well, not just COP, one of the things that even Brenda had talked about, the confidentiality is lax sometimes. I think the systems of confidentiality, sometimes we don't have proper paperwork to make sure that we cover certain things. Like, you know, many Black churches, we're very good with doing the one-on-one sit down, but when it comes to like, let's do a proper intake assessment. Let's talk about more than what you're just telling me right now. You know, who's involved in your plan of care? We don't really go through all of that, maybe because our resources are a little bit limited. So how do we now use some of these formal structures to make sure the people that we are supporting have their information protected, have, you know, a plan? How can they get proper support? How can we guide them? And just as much as if we want to disciple somebody and we take them through discipleship classes, this person is in need of supports. How do we take them through such practices, right? So I really think that with improving the confidentiality in our system, improving also, you know, what are the things that we are teaching our people? Like, our preachings can be more geared toward mental health. Our teachings can be more geared toward mental health. We can invite speakers to come in and talk to our community members about what are the things that are available that we can definitely have them plugged into, and how can there be a benefit so that they can carry a sense of pride and duty, you know, being members contributing to their society, being members that can say that, you know, this church has holistically helped and supported me. So there's a lot of things to tackle. The systematic things definitely are there. The biblical and spiritual things are also there. And I think we have to take all of those approaches to make sure we can properly support individuals who say they have mental health issues.
Definitely, I agree. So lastly, we'll just take this question from the chat. It says the concern that very private information shared with church leaders may not be confidential causes many to suffer unnecessarily for a long time. So how do we address that concern?
I guess I'll jump in. I haven't spoken in a while. That's a hard one. And the reason why is because addressing that concern demands that we call people to a higher standard of non-judgmental listening and vulnerable communication, which is very touchy-feely, and it's not like a mathematical equation. You add this number here, and you add that number here, and you get this end result. But I'd like to kind of root it in something else that I think will shed more light on what I'm really trying to say here. If our interior experiences always aligned with our external experiences, we would be robots, meaning that we would never feel happiness or sadness at all. But because our interior experiences don't always align with our external experiences, we experience something called conflict, right? We all are aware of what conflict feels like. But at an early age, we aren't taught how to communicate conflict to people around us. That would be emotional intelligence. In addition to that, the people around us aren't taught how to hear and listen to conflict in the language of what other people are saying. That would be trauma-informed pedagogy. Now, because both people or both entities aren't trained in that way, what ends up happening is that everybody is quiet, right? Sufferers are quiet, people that could help are quiet, everyone's silent until the issues internally build up so high, they become potentiated, and we need to go to professionals, right? The talking cure, which is the beginning of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, you sit on a couch and you talk up a storm, that was developed to where that strategy could be used by anybody. It wasn't meant to just be a practitioner with a professional stamp of approval. It was meant to be for everybody, the talking cure, right? You verbally express some of your tensions and concerns, and I hold up your tensions and concerns to you and help you dissect them and try to make sense of them in a non-judgmental manner, right? Those are practices that the church can practice, and it doesn't have to be stigmatized as, oh, that's for psychologists or these types of people or those types of people. It's actually right knee deep within biblical understandings of the world and how we're supposed to live with each other, right? One biblical sect, for example, the Quakers, they practice that, right? The type of listening that you need to, embody and the type of speaking that you need to embody to ensure that people and entities can be resolved. And so I say all that to get back to this question of like, how are we going to address that? Well, it's really about holding each individual member up within the body to a standard of being emotionally intelligent and trauma informed in how they listen to things. And those are fancy words now, but way back in the day, that's exactly what Christ exemplified with the disciples, right? I'm gonna listen carefully to what you think you're trying to say, and then replay what you're saying to you, and let's see if we can interpret this together in a better light. And the result of that is always empowerment. The result of that is always feeling invigorated, feeling invincible, feeling like you can conquer anything. The result of that is a deepening of faith. And so it's not anything that we need to go to other institutions for. It's right there within our own institution. It's just that our institution has been, let's say, painted over with a lot of cultural additives that we don't really need. And we need to get back to that source of that exchange between people who are rooted in similar principles.
I think another thing we will be, I know Pastor Phil is on the line, so maybe you can take it to our leadership. Hopefully, I think one thing when it comes to the issue of confidentiality is accountability. So are we as a church going to start to be accountable to one another? So if we look at each body of association, whether it's the Association of Social Workers or even the Teachers Association, any association that is there, there is an accountability attached to it. And so as a church, if we're going to be able to deal with the issues whereby our members are suffering, and many of them, the reason why they're not able to speak is because they are worried that the information is going to be passed on, then we need to come to a standard whereby we're going to hold each other accountable. And by so, it's not just accountability of just those at a local level, but all the way to the top. So for all the way from our apostles down to the members, we need to be able to hold each other accountable. At the end of the day, we are doing the work of God, right? And just as Dr. Joseph said, what Jesus came to do was not a joke. He came to die for each and every single one of us. And if we have been called to be disciples, to make disciples, then just as the souls of every person is important to God, as believers and as leaders, the soul of every single member that we interact with has to be very, very important to us. And so it's not just about their spiritual growth, it's about their holistic growth. And so if I see Parisa and Parisa is dealing with mental health issue because her soul is very important and dear to me, just as it is dear to God, I need to hold myself accountable. If I see that, for example, Keturah has come to tell me information about Parisa that I should not know because I believe that Parisa told her in confidentiality, I should be able to stand up to her and tell her this, I should not be receiving this information. And this is not how things are supposed to be. So if we are going to be able to deal with confidentiality issue, then it needs to pretty much be embedded in the church that we have to hold ourselves accountable. And if anybody falls outside of that line of accountability, then there has to be some repercussions, because if not, we are going to go round and round in circles. And as beautifully Dr. Joseph has said, we won't get anywhere. Because I'm going to be worried to go and tell somebody else my information, because you never know. Just after I've told them, it's going to go to the next person. And before you know it, you become the preaching topic for the next Sunday. Nobody wants that. So we have to be accountable to the very top. And if our dear pastors and elders can maybe help us in regards to passing the information on, I think it will really, really help in not just the young people, but the general congregation as a whole that is dealing with like deep issues that they need help with, to be able to express themselves. And like I said, it's about the soul of every believer. What we fail to do, God is going to ask us. And so if we are failing to keep ourselves accountable in helping these people that need the help, let us remember that God is going to ask us of what we did with the souls that he gave us.
Definitely. That was a great way to close off. So we'll just end it there. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for your time, for your insight, for everything that you've said. It's definitely, I've learned a lot, and I know everyone who's on the line today, on the Zoom today, has learned a lot. So we really want to thank you guys, and we appreciate you guys for everything that you said and all the insight that you've given us. So I'm going to send it over to Deacon TJ to lead us just through a few prayers.
Hallelujah.